Chapter 13, Guidance. The two mothers-in-law couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when they saw that the person woke up, and then they felt that they were sweating in this cool weather, and they couldn't help but raise their sleeves to wipe their foreheads. But no one expected that Yu Fangyan, who had just woken up, suddenly burst out with a trace of ruthlessness in his eyes. She struggled to break free from the two of them, and shouted in a loud voice, "Help, help!" The mother-in-law was startled, and hurriedly reached out to cover her mouth. "What are you calling blind?" But it was already too late. Although Yu Fangyan was weak now, these two voices seemed to use all the strength of his body to shout, echoing in this empty and quiet place. Although the surroundings are quiet, there are also shortcuts passing by. Hearing this voice, I came over and saw that it was Yu Fangyan who was drenched and paralyzed on the ground, and he misunderstood for a while, and he exclaimed loudly without waiting for the mother-in-law to stop him, "Oh no, no, someone has fallen into the water." Those women almost turned green with anger. Those women's face almost turned green with anger. At this time, the garden outside has already begun to appreciate the chrysanthemums, and it is not far from here, and after a while, a large group of people came, including the maids in the house, and the guests who came to the banquet today. Yan Lin was talking to Shenju, and he didn't care when he heard that someone had fallen into the water. But when I inquired, it was said that it was a girl who fell in the lotus pond, and when I recalled the direction Zhang Suning walked, I was startled, and I didn't have time to ask clearly in a panic, so I came to see it with others. Fortunately, when he came, he and everyone were at the end of the lotus pond, and he was relieved to see that although Zhang Suning was by the lotus pond, he was standing upright. After thinking about it, I felt that I cared about it. But the next moment I was puzzled. With that shout, he had almost exhausted all of Yu Fangyan's strength, and he rushed forward and threw himself on the ground after less than 2 steps. Because I fell into the water before, my dress was all soaked, and now it was all attached to my body. Many people under the corridor of the pavilion opposite are looking at this side, pointing and whispering. Zhang Suning's mind flew away for a while, and when she came back to her senses, she could understand the reason for Yu Fangyan's actions. If you don't make a big deal out of it, who knows what else will happen in the future? I don't even know that I was secretly killed in vain. People have been saved. It's too late to regret it. She was dressed in a moon-white dress today and covered with a gown embroidered with gold, so she took it off and gently put it on Yu Fangyan's body, and then made a cold expressionless face, and said to the bustling crowd of onlookers opposite the pool, "What are you doing around? Haven't you seen the mother-in-law punish the girl, and the slave bullying the master?" Wow! This statement simply stunned everyone. The 3 rough envoys standing next to them opened their eyes even wider, looking at Zhang Suning like ghosts. Even Yu Fangyan was stunned. The robe with a little warmth was on her body, and the young girl in front of her, after shedding the loose skirt outside, wore only a moon-white long skirt, which was tucked at the waist, and stood tall and straight, with a slight coldness in her eyebrows. It is like a plum in the snow, and it is like a cold pond moon. Even the best words used to describe beauty in the drama she listened to couldn't describe her. At this moment, even the tip of her nose became sour, and the big tears under her eyes rolled down one after another, but she was stupid, and she couldn't say half of the word thank you, she only knew that she couldn't look away. Yan Lin, who was standing on the opposite side of the pool, knew what was going on as soon as he heard it. His eyes crossed over Zhang Suning's thin and slender figure, and then looked at the sons of the family standing beside him, only to think that they were not looking at the girl who fell into the water, but clearly looking at their own Ning Ning. His brows furrowed unconsciously. Yan Lin lowered his face and immediately said, "Yes, a girl's house fell into the water, and a group of old men are here to see what they are talking about." Hurry up, hurry up. In any case, after all, this is a matter in the house of Uncle Qing Yuan, and the identity of the girl who fell into the water is unknown, so it is indeed not good to stay long. After listening to Yan Lin's words, although they were a little dissatisfied, they still muttered in the end. Only Yan Lin was a few steps behind. Shen Zhu looked at him. But he thought about it, and actually took off his robe directly, handed it to Qing Feng who followed him, and said impatiently, "Give it to her, the cold weather is a girl who doesn't know where it comes from, don't give yourself frost." Qing Fengzhen said that you gave this dress to Zhang Er, and the girl may not dare to wear it if she is afraid of people, but in the end, it is her own master, and she knows his temperament, so she really doesn't dare to talk too much at this time, so she took his delicately embroidered robe and went to the opposite side of the lotus pond. When he arrived, he handed the garment out. Tanger turned her eyes to look at Zhang Xuning, and she didn't know whether to take it or not. Qing Feng sighed in his heart, and only said in a low voice, "If the second girl doesn't answer, the little one will take it back for a while, I'm afraid it won't be easy to explain." Zhang Xuning glanced back at him before saying to Tanger, "Next." Qing Feng suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, "Second Miss Xie has pity." Tanger put away this Tian Shui blue robe and hung it in the crook of his arm, and Qing Feng bowed to Zhang Xuning and retreated. The onlookers dispersed. Only the descendants of Qing Yuan Bafu were left in this vicinity. Zhang Xuning saw that Yu Fangyan was soaking wet, the wind was strong outside, and she trembled when she blew people, and there was no color on her whole face, so she looked at the three mothers-in-law and said, "Although the affairs of your uncle's mansion are not easy for outsiders to deal with, but if you really harm people's lives, aren't you afraid of losing yin virtue?" The three mothers-in-law had heard Zhang Xuning and outsiders babble nonsense. The mother-in-law punishes the girl, and the slave bullies the master, and they were almost so angry that they smoked, but in a blink of an eye, they saw the people around Yan Xiaohe coming to give her clothes, and they were glad that they did not go up to scold Zhang Xuning on impulse, otherwise they would offend people who should not be offended, and they would not be able to go around and walk around. At this moment, listening to Zhang Xuning lecture them, they all buried their heads and laughed and didn't dare to reply. Zhang Xuning didn't want to interfere too much in the affairs of Qing Yuan Bafu, so she only said, "Send people back to the room first." "Yes, yes. The other masters in the house are afraid that they don't know the news here, and they will come after a while," and the actions of the three mothers-in-law have been witnessed by Zhang Xuning. They are both weak and afraid, and when they heard this, they hurriedly responded, stepped forward to help Yu Fangyan, and walked in the direction of the northeast courtyard. Zhang Xuning hesitated for a moment, but actually followed. Tanger was confused in the back. Zhang Xuning is also difficult to describe what she thinks at this moment. Save people to the end, send Buddha to the west? No, she is not such a kind person. Waiting for a miracle to happen? There are enough miracles that have happened to her, and rebirth is a thing, and God will not be so good to her. Maybe it's just a matter of just wanting to take a look. Look at the former Yu Fangyan, what kind of place he lived. The cross courtyard is where the concubines and concubines who have no status and are not favored in the mansion live. The cross courtyard of the Qing Yuan Bo mansion is really not very good, it looks very simple, and the places where the subordinates who have a little head and face in the Zhang mansion live are better than this. After entering the door, the furnishings should be very simple. The bed, wooden screen, tables, and chairs, and the sewing basket of the Kong table still have unfinished needlework, and the surroundings look clean and tidy. There was a little girl in the room who had just left her head, and she didn't know if she was serving Yu Fangyan, but when she saw these many people coming in, she was so scared that she didn't even know how to put her hands and feet. The mother-in-law who was the leader scolded her, and only then did she know that she could bring tea and water and take a handkerchief. Jiang Xuning glanced at her, didn't speak, and couldn't help but look at the room. But after all, Yu Fangyan has never come. There were no miscellaneous books for all kinds of fun in this room, nor rich ayera, nor modern gadgets, nor Western clocks. The illusory feeling when she saved someone just now finally gradually dissipated, sank down again, and became real, and she couldn't afford to have half of her hopes and fantasies. It was also the first time that she really turned her eyes to look at Yu Fangyan in this life. Because there were outsiders, she didn't want to go down to change her clothes. Maybe she was panicked, so she carefully uncovered the clothes that Jiang Xuning had put on her before, and asked the little girl to hug a thin quilt and wrap it around her, looking at her with a blue face. The facial features can only be regarded as delicate. The willow eyebrows, apricot eyes, and cherry lips are good-looking, but there is a lack of spirit between the eyebrows and eyes, like a wooden man carved by a craftsman with poor craftsmanship on the street, sluggish and rigid. A tear mole in the corner of the left eye. This is what the old people often talk about. She tried in vain to find the slightest shadow of another Yu Fangyan on this face, but after looking at it, she realized, no, really no. There is no more Yu Fangyan in the previous life. Yu Fangyan had never seen such a look. The nobleman who saved her seemed to be trying to see another person in her. There is a little bit of sorrow like crying, and it seems to accept reality, but it breaks the dream. She couldn't help but clench her fingers, thinking that she should say something, but when she opened her mouth, she couldn't say half a sentence. Jiang Xuning stood for a long time, blinked, and said to the overwhelmed mothers-in-law, "You go out." The mothers-in-law looked at each other. They doubted in their hearts, but they did not dare to refute it, and even the little girl, although they did not understand the situation, did not dare to stay longer, and withdrew together. Only Jiang Xuning and Yu Fangyan were left in the house. Yu Fangyan finally opened his mouth sneeringly, thank you for saving your life." Jiang Xuning looked at her, raised her finger, gently stroked the face that she should be very familiar with, but felt unfamiliar now, brushed away a strand of hair on her cheeks, and said dreamily, "I should thank you. In order to save you, I have given up the greatest reliance in this life." Yu Fang was stunned. Jiang Xuning laughed self-deprecatingly and said to her, "I think you don't want to die. Now that they have gone to the Hades Palace, what is there to be afraid of in the future? I will continue to live like this, so that I can live like a person, so as not to lose this body." Obviously this is her body, she shouldn't have said such a biased thing. But how can you suppress the loss in your heart? She thinks she's just an ordinary person. Yu Fangyan probably couldn't understand what she was saying, but only knew that she was looking at her with those big eyes. The more Jiang Xuning looked at it, the more lost she became. It's too far off. She wanted to say a lot, but suddenly she couldn't. There are thousands of things hidden in my heart, and I don't know how to talk to them, so I poured them all back into my stomach for a while. Tanger. Jiang Xuning thought for a while, called out, and called Tanger to come in. "Did you bring the money?" Tanger took out a purse, which was stuffed with some silver tickets, 300 taels, 510 taels, and some silver bills. "This is for the girl to buy things on the way home." She glanced at Jiang Xuning, hesitated for a moment, and handed it out. Jiang Xuning opened it and glanced at it, then put it on the table, and said, "You and I are destined. You take this money, go back and pack a good coffin for your aunt, and bury it. As for the rest, keep it for yourself so that you can live." Yu Fangyan didn't know how she knew about her aunt, her eyes turned red in a flash, and she suddenly began to cry. But this cry is silent. Like a fish on the shore, it opened its mouth wide and didn't make any sound, but the more heartbreaking it became. She didn't dare to cry after all. Zhou just died of an ant in the house, or hanged herself. Jiang Xuning only felt depressed here, and she couldn't say a word to this Yu Fangyan, so after sitting for a while, she got up and walked out. I just walked to the door and stopped. She held the door frame with one hand, glanced back at her, and only said lightly, on the morning after 3 days, there will be a businessman named Su Wenyi outside the Jiangjijiang Hall in Dongxi to sell a batch of raw silk. If you save some, it should be enough for you to use for a while. Back then, Yu Fangyan's first pot of gold was not easy to come by, that is, even the money was borrowed from outside. It's just that she dares to think and do, and she has earned it. This Yu Fangyan is like an elm pimple, with a cowardly temperament, shallow knowledge, and his brain doesn't seem to be able to turn a corner. In the previous life, Yu Fangyan's means and vision, even she couldn't learn it. How could this Yu Fangyan be as good as what if? Jiang Xuning instructed like this, but she did it well. She didn't think she could do anything. After saying that, he turned around with his eyebrows raised, called Shangtang Er, and left from this courtyard. Yu Fangyan was the only one left in the room, looking at her distant back with vague teary eyes, and then lowered her head, looked at the purse in her palm, and slowly clenched it.